Look, I heard them at the general store. I mean, I was standing right there at the counter, counting out pennies for flour, and they didn't even bother to lower their voices much. Those poor children, one woman said. Without a father. Like my children were orphans. Like I was. I don't know. Invisible or something? I didn't turn around. 10 years of marriage taught me how to read a room without looking. You learn that. You know, when your presence makes people uncomfortable. You learn to feel the temperature of judgment without ever meeting their eyes. The flower clerk young man couldn't have been more than 20. He looked at me with this pity that made my skin crawl. I smiled and thanked him and walked out with my head up. Because that's what you do. Here's what they don't understand. I'm not grieving my husband. I mean, seriously, does that make me a terrible person? He died 18 months ago. And mostly, I felt relief. God, even saying that out loud feels wrong. But it's the truth. 10 years of being a dutiful wife, an excellent mother, and a completely invisible person. I perfected the art of becoming whatever he needed me to be, until there was nothing left of who I actually was. Now I work myself to exhaustion, dawn to midnight, every single day, sewing by lamplight after the children sleep, selling preserves, taking in washing. My hands are raw. My back aches. I'm so tired I could cry most days, but I answer to no one. And that feels better than comfort ever did. My children see me now, really see me. My daughter, Emma, she's 9, she helps with the sewing without being asked, threading needles with those careful little hands. My sons, they haul water, chop kindling. We don't have abundance, but we have something we never had before. We have a mother who exists. The knock came late afternoon. I knew who it was before I opened the door. My mother-in-law. Mrs. Anderson, standing there with that tight smile she wears like armor. And beside her, well, there was a man, older, thick through the middle, with hands that looked like they'd never touched a dish. Violet, she said, not waiting for an invitation. This is Mr. Thornton from Cedar County. He's a widower. 3 months now. He needs a housekeeper. I finished. And he wouldn't mind acquiring 3 children in the bargain. Mr. Thornton had the decency to look uncomfortable. Mrs. Anderson did not. Your children need a father, she said. And God. I just looked at her. This woman who raised a son who treated me like furniture, who never once asked me what I thought about anything, who measured my worth by how quietly I suffered. My children need their mother to be happy, I said, and I'm not marrying again. Not for security, not for propriety, not for anyone's comfort but my own. The silence that followed was so thick you could taste it. They left. Mr. Thornton actually tipped his hat to me, which was more courtesy than I expected. Mrs. Anderson didn't look back. I stood at the kitchen window after they were gone, looking at the water bucket by the well. It has a crack in it, has had for months. Means I have to make double trips. Hauling water that seeps out a little more with each step. I keep meaning to replace it. Keep not having the money or the time. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. You understand. From the effort of staying present. Of staying visible. Of remaining myself. That night, I lit the lamp to start the evening mending. Emma slid into the chair beside me, threading a needle without a word. Just sat there with me in the lamplight, working together in comfortable silence. I watched her careful hands and thought, this is why. She needs to see that a woman can choose herself, that we don't have to disappear to be loved, even if it means I'm tired, even if it means I'm alone, even if it means people talk. So, the new schoolteacher arrived in November. I didn't think much of it at first. Honestly, just another man. The town was already buzzing Widow Anderson and Widower Cross. How convenient. How perfect. I could feel the town's expectations settling on my shoulders like a yoke. I was too busy to care. But then Emma came home from school with this light in her eyes. Mama, she said, Mr. Cross asked us to write about our mothers. He said mothers are the first teachers we ever have. I stopped kneading bread. Did he now? He said, she paused, trying to remember exactly. He said every person we become starts with what our mothers show us about the world. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just went back to kneading. Flour dusty on my hands, trying not to feel anything about it. The commission came a week later. The schoolhouse needed new curtains, the old ones were falling apart, and someone told Mr. Cross that I did quality work. He showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with fabric and measurements. He was, well, younger than I expected. Maybe 35 then. Like he forgot to eat when he was thinking about something. Spectacles. Gentle hands. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in a library. Not on the frontier. Mrs. Anderson, he said. I'm Nathan Cross. I wonder if you'd be willing to make curtains for the schoolhouse. I can pay. I know you can pay, I said, too sharp. I softened it. I mean, yes, I can do that. He handed me the fabric and the measurements. Counted out fair payment, didn't haggle. Didn't try to negotiate me down like most men do. Just, thank you. Your daughter speaks very highly of you. I should have left it there. Should have just taken the commission and closed the door. But as he was turning to leave, he paused. Mrs. Anderson, he said, what do you think about the railroad expansion? I heard you speak against it at the town meeting last month. I just stared at him. No one asks me that. No one asks me what I think about anything except whether I can have mending done by Tuesday. I think, I said slowly, that the railroad companies are exploiting settlers, promising connection and prosperity while stealing land rights and charging rates that'll bankrupt small farmers. His whole face changed, like I'd said something that surprised him. Exactly, he said. That's exactly what I think. But everyone at the meeting acted like I was being unreasonable. And then we were talking. really talking about land rights and exploitation, and whether progress was worth the cost it demanded from ordinary people. He disagreed with me about government intervention, thought it would just create different corruption, and I argued back. And he listened and conceded points. And 20 minutes passed like water. I should go, he finally said. But he was smiling. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson, for the conversation and for taking the commission. Walking back into my house felt strange, like I'd stepped out of one world and back into another. That night, I worked on his curtains. Emma had already gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the sound of my needle pulling thread, and I found myself, stitching more carefully than I needed to, making the seams perfect, the hems exact. Then I caught myself doing it. I deliberately loosened my grip on the fabric, made my stitches functional instead of perfect, because that's how it starts. Isn't it? You start trying to impress someone, start making things beautiful for their approval, start pruning away your sharp edges to fit their comfort. I know how this story goes. I was married for 10 years. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not becoming curious about any man's interior landscape. I'm not wondering what he thinks about when he's alone. I'm not. Look, I tried to keep my distance. I really did. But my youngest Thomas, he's 7, he came home from school with this huge smile on his face. Mama. I made a friend. Her name is Sarah, and she's Mr. Cross's daughter, and she can skip rocks really far, and she wants to play after school tomorrow. Can she? Please? How do you say no to that? How do you tell your child that his happiness is dangerous to your carefully constructed walls? You can't. So I didn't. 1 hour, I said. At the schoolyard, I'll be there. I set firm boundaries. In public, I'd supervise from a bench, very proper, very distant, nothing improper, nothing that would give the town gossip's ammunition. Except, well, Nathan was there too. Of course he was. Supervising his daughter. He sat down on the bench beside me. Didn't ask permission. Just settled in with this comfortable silence first. Like he understood that sometimes silence is its own kind of conversation. Then he said, I've been thinking about what you said, about the railroad companies. And we were off again, talking, debating, disagreeing about solutions, but agreeing about problems. He didn't soften his arguments for me, didn't explain things I already knew, didn't treat me like I needed protection from complex ideas. He treated me like an intellectual equal. I looked up at one point, and the sun had moved. A full hour had passed like minutes. Thomas was teaching Sarah how to skip stones in the creek, both of them laughing when the stones plopped instead of skipped. I should get them home, I said. Of course. He stood, called to Sarah. Same time next week. I should have said no, should have made an excuse, but Thomas's happy face. Same time. I heard myself say, walking home. Thomas chattered about his new friend. I barely heard him. I was replaying the conversation in my head. The way Nathan had leaned forward when I made a point. The way he'd laughed when I'd made a joke about the mayor's terrible hat. The way he'd looked at me like I was interesting. That night, I caught myself humming while washing dishes. I stopped abruptly, stood there with my hands in soapy water, staring at my reflection in the dark window. This is how it happens. Small moments of happiness that you start arranging your life around. Then suddenly, you're bending yourself, accommodating, adjusting your shape to preserve those moments. And before you know it, you've disappeared entirely into someone else's life. I dried my hands, put the dishes away, checked on the children, all three asleep. Then I sat alone in the dark kitchen and whispered to myself, "Be careful. Please, please, be careful." Because I know how to survive loneliness. I don't know if I can survive disappearing again. So here's what happened. The children's friendship. It deepened. You know, Sarah and Thomas became inseparable, which meant Nathan and I kept having these conversations. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, the children would play while we talked. Then he started stopping by in the early evenings, just showing up on my porch with a borrowed newspaper or a book he thought I'd like. He'd sit on the steps, never presumed to come inside, while all 5 children played in the yard together. And we'd talk about everything: politics, philosophy, books, the absurdity of frontier life. Whether God was present in nature or if nature just was. Whether education should teach obedience or critical thinking. I started looking forward to it, started listening for his footsteps on my porch, started noticing when he was late. That's when I knew I was in trouble. He never interrupted me mid-thought. That's what got me. I think he'd wait until I'd completely finished, then ask these follow-up questions that proved he'd actually been listening. Not just waiting for his turn to talk, actually listening. When I mentioned being tired, he didn't offer solutions, didn't try to fix anything. Just, "That sounds exhausting. I honestly don't know how you manage it all." Just witness. Not rescue. Witness. Then one Saturday, he noticed the water bucket. I was filling it at the well he was passing by with Sarah, and he stopped. "Mrs. Anderson," he said carefully, "I notice your bucket has a crack. I could fix that for you. But," he paused, "but I know you might prefer to handle it yourself. I'm just offering." I stared at him. The permission to refuse was so unexpected that I didn't know what to do with it. "You could fix it," I asked. "I could, if you'd like." I should have said no, should have maintained the boundary, but I was so tired of making double trips, of watching water seep away with each step. "All right," I said. "Thank you." He came by that afternoon, brought his tools, sat on my porch while the children played, and carefully soldered the crack closed. I brought him water well in a cup, not the bucket, and found myself just watching his hands, the careful way he worked, the concentration on his face. I was happy, actually, genuinely happy in male company, and that scared me more than anything. That night, after he'd left. I looked at the bucket, now perfect, watertight, and felt panic rising in my throat. What was I doing? Why was I letting this happen? I started making excuses after that. Too tired for visitors. Too much work. Children need early bedtime. Any reason to avoid those evening conversations that had started to feel like breathing. He noticed. Of course he noticed. One evening, he left the bucket on my porch with a note. No obligation. Just wanted to help. I held that bucket. Perfect and repaired. And my throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. What if I'm ruining this by being afraid? But what if I'm ruining myself by not being afraid enough? Happiness in male presence was always conditional before. I purchased it with my compliance, my smallness, my careful editing of anything that might displease. Is this different? Or am I just performing a new version of acceptable woman I don't know? God help me. I don't know. Winter came early that year. First snow in November, unusual for Wyoming. But there it was, and Emma got sick. Nothing serious. Just a fever and cough. But enough to upend everything. I missed sewing deadlines, lost income, fell behind on everything. I was managing barely when Nathan showed up on a Saturday morning. "I have a proposal," he said. "Let me watch all 5 children today so you can catch up on work. Not as a favor to you specifically, I need practice managing a household anyway. Sarah and I are, well, we're figuring it out as we go." The phrasing, you know, it gave me room to accept without owing him anything. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I'm sure." So I let him. Let him take all 5 children for the entire day. And I was alone in my house for the first time in, God, I don't even know how long. I should have felt relieved. I had deadlines. Work piling up. Finally had silence to concentrate. But mostly I just felt lonely. I missed the sound of Nathan's laugh mixing with my children's voices. Missed our conversations about nothing and everything. The house felt wrong without all of them in it. He brought them back at sunset, fed, clean, happy. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. "Your daughter," he said. "Taught my son how to darn socks. I learned more about parenting today than in any book." He paused. "They're remarkable children. Violet, you've done something extraordinary with them." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked him and started ushering the children inside. But then he spoke again. Softer. "Violet, can I ask you something?" I turned back. He was standing on my porch, backlit by the setting sun. And he looked uncertain, which was new. "Why did you stop wanting to talk with me?" The question hung between us. I could have lied, should have lied, but I was so tired of performing. "Because," I said quietly, "I started wanting it too much." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. He didn't move, didn't try to touch me or close the distance, just looked at me with these eyes that were too understanding, too kind. "I understand being afraid of wanting," he said finally. Then he left. I stood on my porch in the cold, watching him walk away. And I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, because I just told the truth and he hadn't used it against me. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen. The repaired bucket sat by the sink, catching moonlight. Perfect, watertight. A gift given with no strings attached. I'm falling in love with being seen, with being heard, with being valued as a whole person instead of a useful object. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about. What if the problem isn't him? What if the problem is me? What if I'm someone who disappears around men, regardless of their intentions? What if I'm constitutionally incapable of remaining myself in partnership? What if I'm about to repeat the same mistake, just with a kinder man? This time, I looked at my sleeping children, Emma, in one bed, the boys in another, and whispered into the darkness. I've survived worse than heartbreak, but I don't know if I can survive becoming invisible again. And I don't know how to tell the difference between love and erasure until it's too late. Look, I thought the worst part was over. I thought I'd faced the hard questions and made the safe choice, keeping my distance, protecting myself, protecting my children from watching their mother disappear again. Then my mother-in-law filed papers, custody papers, claiming I was unfit, working too hard, exposing the children to poverty, refusing to provide a proper father figure. Legally, it was weak, I knew that. Everyone knew that, but socially, God, socially, it was a knife in the back. Everywhere I went, conversations stopped, eyes followed. My children came home quiet from school. And I knew they'd heard whispers, heard other children repeat what their parents had said. The town meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. My mother-in-law would present her case publicly, and I'd have to defend myself. I spent 3 nights preparing what I'd say, how I'd explain that my children were thriving, that poverty wasn't neglect, that choosing to be myself wasn't the same as choosing to be selfish. But when the meeting came, when Mrs. Anderson stood up and started talking about those poor children and a mother's pride preventing proper provision, Nathan stood up first. I hadn't expected that, hadn't asked for it, didn't want it. I teach those children, he said. His voice was calm, clear. Every single day, and I can tell you that they are the most well-adjusted, thoughtful students I have. They've learned resilience, independence, compassion. They care for each other. They ask questions. They think critically. What they have, what their mother has given them, is better than a 2-parent household built on obligation. The room went silent. My mother-in-law tried to argue, said children need stability, need a father's guidance. Nathan just looked at her calmly and said, I was raised in a 2-parent household where I was seen and not heard. I teach children every day from stable homes who've learned that love means obedience and questioning means disrespect. Violet Anderson's children have learned something different. The petition was dismissed. Of course there was no legal basis. But the damage was done. The gossip wouldn't stop just because the law sided with me. I should have been grateful. I was grateful. But I found him outside after the meeting. I didn't need you to rescue me, I said. Too sharp. Too angry. He turned to look at me. I know. Then why? I wasn't rescuing you. Violet, I was telling the truth about what I observe in your children. There's a difference. I wanted to argue, wanted to explain why his defense felt like taking away my agency. But the words wouldn't come because maybe he was right. Maybe there is a difference between witnessing truth and playing savior. I walked away instead. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake knowing my anger at Nathan was misplaced fear, knowing that I should apologize. But apology means acknowledging I care what he thinks, and caring is the first step toward accommodating, and accommodating is the first step toward disappearing. Maybe I'm safer angry. Maybe pushing him away is self-preservation, not self-sabotage. I don't know anymore. I don't know anything except that I'm exhausted from fighting myself. I stopped all contact after that, completely, made excuses, avoided places where I might see him, kept conversations minimal if I couldn't avoid him entirely. My children noticed. Why doesn't Mr. Cross visit anymore? Thomas asked. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't reveal too much, so I just said I was busy. Too much work. Maybe later. But at night, when they were asleep, I remembered. God help me. I remembered everything I'd spent years trying to forget. My courtship with their father. How he'd seemed so different from other men. How he'd asked my opinions about politics, literature, life. How he'd seemed genuinely interested in who I was. Then we married, and slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice until it was too late, my opinions became inconvenient. My preferences became complaints. My needs became demands. My very selfhood became selfishness. It happened so gradually. A comment here. Do you really need to read so much? It makes you unavailable. A suggestion there. Maybe don't argue with my father about politics. It embarrasses me. Little adjustments. Tiny accommodations. Until I looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize myself. What if that's just how it works? What if men seem respectful at first, seem to value you, and then the pruning begins so slowly you don't notice until you've vanished completely? What if Nathan is just a kinder version of the same story? The thought wouldn't leave me alone. I'd lie awake thinking, maybe I'm someone who disappears around men. Maybe choosing myself was the aberration, a brief moment of freedom, before I inevitably bend myself into someone else's shape again. Maybe this loneliness is what I actually deserve for being too broken to sustain partnership. One night, I found the bucket Nathan had repaired. I'd been avoiding looking at it, kept it turned so I wouldn't see where he'd soldered the crack. But that night, I picked it up, turned it in the lamplight, examined his careful work. Perfect. Completely watertight. Holding water without waste. And I just started crying. Not for my husband. Not for the marriage that had slowly killed me, but for the girl I was before all of that. The girl who believed she mattered, who thought her voice had value, who imagined partnership could mean something other than accommodation. I sat on my kitchen floor, holding that bucket, and cried for her. For who I was before I learned to disappear. Morning came eventually. I made breakfast for my children, braided Emma's hair, sent them to school, went through all the motions of living. But inside, Inside, I was hollow. That night, washing dishes, I thought I know how to survive loneliness. I've been lonely in a marriage bed. I've been lonely while performing perfect wife. I've been lonely surrounded by people who claim to love me. But I don't know if I can survive disappearing again. So maybe loneliness is the safer choice. Maybe being alone but visible is better than being partnered but invisible. Maybe that's just what life is now. A full year. That's how long it had been since Nathan arrived. Winter again. Snow on the ground again. The same cold creeping into the house. I sat on my porch after the children went to bed, wrapped in a shawl, looking at stars, trying to remember why I'd chosen this loneliness over the possibility of connection. I heard footsteps on the porch boards. Nathan. Of course it was Nathan. He didn't ask permission to sit, just settled beside me with a long silence first. We sat like that for a while, our breath visible in the cold air, stars sharp and bright overhead. Then he spoke. "I need to say something," he said quietly. "And then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." I didn't answer, couldn't answer. "I don't want to be your children's father," he said. "They have a father in their memory. And that's right. I don't want to fix your life or save you from hardship. You're managing beautifully better than beautifully. You're raising remarkable children while maintaining your own selfhood. And that's," he paused, "that's extraordinary." I felt my throat tighten. "What I want," he continued, "is to be your partner. Someone who sees you, hears you, values you exactly as you are. Your children will benefit from you being happy. Violet, not from you being married. They'll benefit from seeing their mother choose partnership from strength, not need." The distinction broke something open in my chest. "Marry me only if I make you happier," he said. "Otherwise, I'm content being your friend. I'm content with whatever you choose. The offer stands with no pressure and no timeline. I needed you to know." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, because this was different. He wasn't asking me to become someone else. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering witnessed existence, partnership, not absorption. "Nathan," I finally managed. I was married for 10 years to a man who wanted a wife, but not a person. I became excellent at everything except existing. When he died, I swore I'd never disappear again. I know. What terrified me about you was that I wanted to be seen by you so much that I thought I might disappear into that wanting. I thought I'd start accommodating, adjusting, pruning away my edges to preserve your approval. I don't want you to do that. But how do I know? My voice broke. How do I know the difference between healthy partnership and the beginning of erasure? How do I trust myself when I've already failed once? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Don't disappear. Stay visible. Stay yourself. That's all I want, Violet. Fully present." Arguing with me about politics and correcting my assumptions and reminding me when I'm being dense. I don't want less of you. I want to witness more. Something in my chest. unlocked. Some door I'd been holding closed with all my strength. Ask me again in 3 months, I heard myself say. If I'm still myself, if I haven't started performing or accommodating or pruning my edges to fit your comfort, ask me again. I will, he said simply. He stood, looked down at me in the moonlight. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. Then he left. I sat alone on the porch, crying, but not from sadness, from relief, from recognition. He didn't ask me to be smaller. He asked me to stay myself. That's never happened before. 3 months later, I stood at my kitchen window, the same spot where I'd stood exhausted and defiant 2 years ago, where I'd watched my mother-in-law leave with her suitable gentleman, where I'd decided I'd rather collapse from exhaustion than disappear into another marriage. But now Nathan was outside teaching my sons how to repair fence posts. Emma sat on the porch reading one of his books that he'd lent her. All 5 children moved between houses like it was natural, like they'd always been one family instead of 2, and I hadn't disappeared. If anything, I was more myself than ever, arguing more freely, laughing louder, existing without apology. That evening, Nathan came to the door. We'd spent the last 3 months in careful courtship talking, spending time together, letting the children blend naturally. But I'd watched myself carefully, looking for signs of accommodation, moments where I bit my tongue or adjusted my behavior to preserve his comfort. They hadn't come. Are you still yourself? He asked. I laughed. More than ever. Then will you marry me? Yes. Just like that. Yes. Not because I need him. Not because my children need a father. Not because society says I should. But because partnership makes me happier. Because being truly seen doesn't erase me. It clarifies me. Because I've learned that there's a difference between rescue and witness. Sunday dinner. 3 weeks later, our blended family around the table. I mentioned something about the upcoming town council election, my opinion on the land use proposal. Nathan disagreed. We argued. Both of us smiling. The children watching this model of 2 adults who respect each other enough to challenge each other. Emma watched us closely, learning something I never learned young, that a woman can be both strong and connected, both independent and partnered. That vulnerability isn't weakness, and compromise isn't erasure. That night, after everyone else went to bed, I filled the repaired bucket at the well. 1 trip instead of 2. Perfect. Watertight. Holding everything it's meant to hold without waste. I carried it back to the house. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Voices Nathan reading to the younger children. Emma helping with something in the kitchen. The sounds of family. I set the bucket down, looked at this life I'd built, this life I'd chosen. They said my children needed a father. What we all needed was permission to be fully ourselves. And sometimes being fully yourself means letting someone else see you clearly, without flinching, without performing, without disappearing. That's not rescue. That's love. The end.